Hi everybody, I'm Tim from troutandfeather.com, and in this fly tying tutorial we're going to tie a really great fly that can be used for both trout and steelhead called the Mega Prince. Stay tuned. Let's first take a look at this finished Mega Prince, and I'm sure you're immediately going to be drawn to those chartreuse colored rubber legs, and that's really the intent of the fly that I'm going to be tying for you today. I really want to show those contrasting colors between the chartreuse legs and that peacock colored body, the peacock dubbing on this fly. You'll notice a few other characteristics. If you think about the Prince nymph, you're probably thinking about biots, and we do have biots on the top. However, instead of biots for the tail, we're going to be using some marabou. It's a product from Alsdorf Genetic, and I'll show you that marabou whenever we get to that tying procedure. Then the other thing that you'll probably notice, there's this little bit of a tag or a butt of wire. So I'll be talking a little bit more about that. Is that a necessary component to this fly? In my mind, it's not, though the original pattern for the Mega Prince calls for it, which is why I have left it in this. And I can tell you, on all the ones that I fish, I typically will leave it in there. It really doesn't increase, or we'll say increase the difficulty of this pattern. It adds a little bit more weight and definitely a little bit more flash. So that's something you can kind of keep in mind whenever you're tying it. But there are so many things going on in this fly, and before I start tying it, I'll mention this is, I don't want to call this an advanced pattern because it's not. It's more of an intermediate pattern, but there are tons of steps to this fly. There are lots of materials, and this is one of those flies you don't want to lose, because every time you lose one of these, you say to yourself, geez, I have a good 10 minutes tying that fly. I really don't want to lose many more of those. So really be cautious when you're fishing this fly, but understand that its intent is to catch large trout. It catches them, especially in certain conditions. We'll talk about those conditions after we tie this fly. So without any further ado, let's get to tying this Mega Prince. Well, there are certainly many steps to this Mega Prince, so let's get started. In my Stonfo Transformer vise, I have a hook from Allen Fly Fishing. It's their N212BL. It's a nymph hook, really great hook for this application. I'm using size 12, though I will tie this one as large as a size 4. So don't be afraid to go larger when in doubt with this pattern. With this size 12 hook, I've paired a tungsten bead. It's about a size 2.8 millimeters. And if you look, I've kind of just pushed the bead back for now. That's because we're going to be centering on, or I guess focusing on, the eye section. So I'm going to first grab some 8/0 thread. This is thread from Uni. The color's black. We're just going to tie in directly behind that eye, and let's keep that thread pretty close to the eye. Now I'm going to stop it about 1 eye length back. And what we're going to first add is a piece of chartreuse rubber leg material. Now the color is completely up to you, but the reason I'm going chartreuse is because the rest of the fly I'm going to be tying in this video is going to be black, and I really want to see that contrasting color combination. And I think chartreuse and black are really, they just offer such great contrasting colors. Now to tie this in, if you notice, I'm going to be tying it in, and I'm going to tie it in at that back point. So the reason I mentioned to start in from that back point is because then it allows you to have a little bit of wiggle room so you can push those legs forward, lock them in place with 1 or 2 wraps, and then separate them before finishing. So if you take a look at how they look right now, and this is just with, I think, a total of 3 or 4 wraps, I can now wrap back, really get those legs secure, make sure they're separated, just kind of move them around a little bit, but you'll notice I can't even move them that much. Once I'm sure they're secure, I'll put a couple figure-8 wraps in them again, just to really make sure that they're going to stay separate, or separated. And I'm going to add a little bit of material. This is some ice dub, and the color's peacock. Really easy to make a small noodle with. We're talking about just a pinch of this stuff. I basically just want to cover my thread wraps, get a little bit in front of them, and I can immediately go to a whip finish. After I have that all locked in place, I'm actually going to pull some of the dubbing down as well. Trim the dubbing and my thread all at the same time. Looks like I have everything covered. I'm going to trim we can call these antennae at this point. Now we have to kind of think about what we're trying to achieve with these. I just talked about the color contrast, and that's something I really think that's important. If I leave this super long, not that I would ever want to necessarily leave it this long, but the current's going to have really a lot of action with it. Plus it's going to not look extremely realistic, not that this pattern does by any means. But I really try to keep very similar proportions. So I'm just going to fold it back over the hook. I'm going to cut it at about the half hook shank length, somewhere around there. If they're not perfectly even, you can trim them out. It looks like this one might be a hair longer, but that's not something that's really I would stress over. Next, we're going to take our bead and just really plop it up against those. And that bead is going to be acting more as weight than anything else, though I did choose to use a black nickel one, so it will kind of blend in with everything. Next, I'm going to add my thread back behind the bead. So now I'm working from that left side of the bead from my perspective. The first material we're going to tie in now on this side is going to be some soft wire from Uni. The size is small, the color is silver, it's actually considered a neon. So I have a little strip of this stuff that I've already pre-cut. Just going to tie it in close to the bead. It's not going to be holding the bead forward or anything. But as I'm wrapping back, let me talk a little bit about this. So the fly's original pattern calls for this material to be wrapped back almost down 1/3 of the way down the hook bend. That's a long distance. So whenever you do that and you use the original size, which is brassy or a medium in this Uni, what I've noticed is that it kind of distorts the pattern a little bit because it really just, you have a lot of gapping as you're wrapping it back up. And it almost just doesn't look neat at all. In fact, I took some pictures of some of these flies that I had tied prior to this video and I posted them on Instagram. And one of my buddies, Ray, commented that those with the really heavier wire, they didn't look quite right. He was asking, what's the whole point of tying this in the way that I'm about to do it? And it's really to serve as an attractor. And Ray immediately said back, you know what, could you use something like a tinsel or crystal flash, something that really won't bunch up that much but will still be used as an attractor? And in short, you definitely can, because we're going to be tying this in right now as a tag or kind of as the butt of this fly, and then it's eventually going to be used as ribbing. Will it provide some weight? Absolutely. Do I want it providing a little bit of that shine, that shimmer in the water? Yes, all of the above. So don't be afraid to experiment with this material. So I originally tied these with more of a medium or a brassy size. I just didn't like that, which is why I've brought it down to a size small. Now, whenever I start wrapping this, I'm going to immediately counter wrap it, because that's going to be the way I'm going to be wrapping the ribbing whenever I tie in my peacock for the body. So I just want to start doing it in that direction right now. Thus, whenever I have to use it as the ribbing, it's not going to bunch up against itself. So now I'm just wrapping it. This is kind of forming that tag or that butt section. Really try your best to get those wraps really touching as close together as possible. It's really tough as you're coming up a bend though. When you get to the approximate tail wrap-in point, which is right above where the hook point would be, or I'm sorry, the barb would be, though this is a barbless. I'm just going to wrap it around this side of my transformer vise, just kind of lock it in place in my material clip. Now we can wrap our thread back and we can add a few more of these materials. There are so many materials to this fly. Well, the next material is a simple one, and this is going to be a piece of marabou. So I'll show you the piece of marabou I'm going to be using. This is more of a grizzly colored marabou. When I first grab this piece, it looks very light, and I really prefer this fly to have some really darker attributes. But whenever you kind of condense all these fibers together, you can see they're much darker. And as they get wet, they're really going to show both the dark and the light. So I'm just to lock them in place, I'm just going to bunch them together. This is going to be a shorter tail. Just lock them in place with about 3 or 4 wraps, and it was just a little longer than I wanted it. Yeah, that looks a little bit better there. And before I start wrapping forward, I really want to first just trim this as close to that bead as possible, but I want to leave just a little bit of a gap in there. So now you're going to notice as I'm wrapping down these butt fibers, I'm going to have a little bit of a gap between where I finished them and the bead. And that's really something you have to focus on, because we're going to be tying in a lot of materials at that section. Now we're just going to wrap back. And before I show you the next step, I want to just pause for a minute and show you where I got this marabou from. This is from a gentleman whose products I've mentioned in my videos before. His name is Joel Alsdorf. His website is alsdorfgenetic.com, and I'll also place that in the description of the video. I met Joel a few years ago at the Cranberry Fly Fishing Show, and Joel sells a ton of hackle, and he also sells these packs, which are called Bugaboo packs, which I believe the original intent was for this to be marabou for woolly buggers. And he sells them in packs of 3 or 4. This is a pack of 4. It's got a grizzly, but though it's kind of a gray-black. We have a really dark gray or a light black, a light gray, and then a grizzly that he dyed olive. It's a really light olive. He sells these in different color combinations at the shows. I buy 1 or 2 of these packs off him every year. This stuff is just awesome. Joel, if you're watching this video, thank you so much for supplying that marabou. It is such a high quality marabou. I greatly appreciate it. All right, well next let's get back to this Mega Prince. The next step is just to go back to our rubber legs, and we're going to tie in another set of rubber legs going backwards. I'm going to wrap them around the thread, and now I'm going to lock them in place. Think about where that last thread wrap had been on the tail, and I want them about 1 eye length in front of that point. For the same reason, because now I can kind of figure out where I want them, and I have a little bit of room to wrap back and get them locked into place. So I know where I want them. Let's make a couple wraps back. I want to just pause right there and show you what it looks like from my perspective. So you can see there's that little gap between where I tied them in and now that I'm wrapping back, where I'm now officially locking them in. And you can see how they've splayed out just how I want them to. Okay. They're looking good at this point. I'm just going to trim them right now. I want them to be a little bit longer than the tips on that marabou tail. Look pretty good. This one might be a hair longer. I leave that for now. Our next material is going to be peacock herl. I just have 3 or 4 strands together. I have them bunched up at the tips. I'm going to trim them just so they're all even. I want to line those up so that's, again, kind of at that point where I had finished the marabou. Bring them to that point. Stop right there and let's wind them forward. We're going to get these closer to that bead, but again, we don't want to crowd that bead quite yet. So let's lock them in place, 3 or 4 wraps. And then set those to the side. Our next step now is to return to that piece of wire that we had in place. And we're going to use this to counter rib the peacock. Let's take our time to make sure we have that spaced out evenly. Place it a few wraps near the bead. I'm just going to look around. I like the spacing. Now that I've had this wrapped, I'm just going to lock it in place with a few wraps in front and behind it. If we wrap that in, we get that locked in securely, we can then simply kind of helicopter it to get it out of the way. And it will have a nice, even break off. Maybe. All right, so we have that out of the way now. Wasn't as even as I liked it. Next we have just a few more materials. I'm going to go back to our rubber legs, put them on just like I had before. Let's just double them up, lock them in place. Now we don't have to worry about that we'll say the hook eye anymore, because I can just wrap back a hair, get them separated. I really want them coming out almost perpendicular to the fly, like this. I'm just going to put a few figure 8 wraps around them just to make sure they're really coming out from the sides and not from the top. Once I've achieved that, I'm going to then just immediately trim them. I really want them going to around the bend of the hook, no further. So I'll kind of use that for my proportions. Now let's add some legs in. And for our legs, we're going to be using just a really simple piece of hen hackle. Now let me show you what this looked like prior to me preparing it. I got this little hen neck right here. I grab one of the pieces, and then with the feather facing me, and imagine this is the front of the feather, I stripped off all the fibers from the left side. I basically just pulled them down. Now on the right side, I left them all there, and I even left some of these fluffy ones. I'm not sure if I'll quite use all those feathers, but I really love having some of these fluffy feathers in there because they really just move well in the water. Then I stroked all the fibers down from the tip, and I'm leaving the letter V in there. And if you look at that V, think of that as our tie-in point. So I'm just going to invert this because I want that rounded edge to face the front. So I'm going to invert it and tie it in right at that V. I have it locked in there. Let's get our tip out of there. Just to make sure we have that piece hidden, I'm just going to add one more wrap. Now if you feel comfortable, you can wrap this with your hand. Otherwise, you can grab some type of a hackle plier. This is a set of hackle pliers from Stonfo. It's called their Stonfo Elite. I've been using these for a number of years now. I've recommended these to so many tyers who've come back and said they're just an incredible pair of hackle pliers. They sell a micro and a standard. This is the standard size. This is the size that I would recommend getting. I use these for so many applications. What we have to do is just grab onto the end of the stem. And I only want to make about 2 turns. I really don't want to over hackle this fly. And if you think about removing half of the hackles, that's really what I'm doing there. I'm really just trying to be cognizant to not get too many leg fibers in this fly. I really feel like we over hackle so many of our patterns. I just need a couple wraps to lock this in place. See if I can trim this and not get anything else. All right, we're getting close to the end. We're not quite there, just a couple more materials. So let's get back to the notion of the name of this fly. Now the Mega, I think, is going to be pretty self-explanatory, but the Prince is a really classic pattern. And whenever we think about the Prince, we really just think about that peacock curl body and biots. So we're going to be adding biots to this fly, and we didn't have biots for the tail, but we are going to use them for we'll call these the wings going back. Now, the traditional calls for white biots. These are not white biots, and this is not a traditional Prince. Since this is the Mega Prince, I'm going to stick with that chartreuse color. I have some chartreuse biots. I'm just going to trim away 2 of these from the stem. I'm going to wrap them in one at a time. I want to make them so that curved edge is pointing down. I really want to try to make sure that they stick up just a little bit. I'm going to have them extend almost to the bend of the hook. So I'll tie in one, really give it a few tugs as I lock it in place because I want it just extending up just a little bit. Once I'm sure that one's locked in, I'm going to do the same thing with the other side. I'm going to line it up to make sure their tips are about the same length. Same as before, just give it a nice little, just help it up just a little bit. I want them splayed correctly. There's a little bit of movement in there which tells me they are not fully locked down. So let's get this one locked in place again. Okay, that's where I want it. Now it's locked in place. So we can see we have kind of an X pattern in a sense going with those 2. I'm going to take their butt ends and just kick them straight up. And I want to get a few wraps in front of those. It really will help to just kind of make them go perpendicular to the hook. It'll be a lot easier for me to trim those away now. There's 1, and there's 2. Just get a few more wraps to kind of hide those, but then to really kind of act like that carpenter and hide everything at the end, I'm going to return to my Ice Dub peacock color. Get another healthy clump. Let's just dub this on, and we're really just making sure that all of these finishing wraps are kind of hidden below this because we don't want to see any of those. I'm just going to tuck that in, see if we can hide everything. Look at it from the bottom. You can see I'm even hiding a little bit of that bead. That's not a bad thing. But the problem with this right now is I got a little too much on there and I can't get a good tie-off point from my my thread. So I'm just going to take off a little bit of this stuff. Maybe make it a little tighter this time. Let's push it up there. I'm going to try to wrap a little bit further back, kind of make my way forward. It's not that I want to see that bead, but I want to see a spot where I can get my thread in there to really lock it in place, but also to make sure you can't see that thread. Now I feel like I have the ability to do that. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now I think my thread is a little bit more hidden. Let's trim this away. With some of this ice dub kind of sticking all over. It's not a bad thing. I want to just kind of make sure it's a little bit closer to the hook shank. And there is our finished Mega Prince. I'll give you a 360 of it. You can see those rubber legs. They really will show up well in the water, especially stained water. You can see those traditional wings going back, those biots. Now in this case, I'll talk a little bit about this fly. I'll sometimes prop those up a little bit prior to tying them in, so they're a little bit, they ride up a little bit higher, but that to me is not really critical. To me, I'm leaving them in there because it's a little bit more of that traditional type of a Prince nymph, but also I love that chartreuse color. It really gives this fly just some great contrasting characteristics once it's in the water. So now that we've finished tying this fly, let's talk a little bit more about it from both a fly tying and a fly fishing perspective. Calling all creative fly tyers. This fly is definitely for you. Prior to filming this video, I tied about 50 of the Mega Prince, and I can tell you that no two of mine looked exactly alike, and it's because I had so much fun varying all the materials. The obvious thing that you can really vary is those rubber legs. Now the one thing that I put on some of the flies was a smaller diameter rubber leg, but I didn't like that. I really shot for that medium diameter leg. I thought that one just really went with this fly perfectly. In terms of the color, go crazy. And I'm talking about the color of the rubber leg, the marabou. I'm talking about the color of that crystal flash dubbing if you want to change that up a little bit. I'm talking about those biots. You can really go nuts with so many different things, including even that wire section in the back for that butt/tag. Like my buddy Ray had mentioned, you don't have to stick with a wire. You can go with something a little bit more flat, such as a tinsel. But by all means, have fun with this fly. See what you can come up with. Consider having some that are just a neutral color, maybe all black. And then go for some that have that really stark contrast in colors, like the chartreuse in black, hot pink in black. But basically, have fun with it and see what you come up with. Now let's shift gears a little bit towards that most important side, and that's the catching of fish with this fly. Now whenever I think about fly fishing with this pattern, I'm thinking about using it in moving water for trout, for steelhead. Now if I'm using it for trout and steelhead, I may kind of present it differently. For trout, I'm probably going to have this fly being that point fly, and I'll have more trailing behind it, because without a doubt, whenever I have those chartreuse legs, this is definitely going to capture attention. With steelhead, I may be fishing this fly by itself, possibly with one other fly, but no more than 2 patterns. Now where I fish this fly can vary at times. I really prefer to fish this fly in pools and sometimes in riffles. Now I don't really like to use this in those shallow riffles because I tend to lose more flies in those riffles, and this is one of those flies that just takes a little bit longer than usual to tie. So this is one of those flies I don't like to lose. Now with that said, are you going to lose some? More than likely, yes. We're using a tungsten bead, we're using wire. I'm probably going to be fishing it below split shot. It's going to get snagged, and it stinks to lose it, but that's the name of the game because ultimately we're trying to catch fish. So this is not one of those quick 2-minute patterns. You may be able to modify it into one, but instead get them tied, get them in your box, and figure out which situations they work best for. This could be a fly that if you're heading out west and you think you're going to be doing some nymphing, it could work really well in that situation. Same thing goes with steelhead. This is a fly that will absolutely capture their attention, and then it's up to you to land them. Well, with that said, if you have any questions or comments regarding this Mega Prince, please don't hesitate to leave them below in the comments section, or you can email me at tcamisa@gmail.com. And I'd also love to hear about some of the other color combinations that you're thinking of right now to really get those creative juices flowing. I know as soon as I saw this fly, I said to myself, I'm going to have fun with this one. And I can guarantee you, if you look in my box and see all these rows of these different Mega Princes, I had a lot of fun tying it. If you'd like to watch more of my fly tying and fly fishing videos, I encourage you to check out my website, which is troutandfeather.com. I also have a Facebook page and an Instagram account associated with Trout and Feather, so check those out for some regular fly tying and fly fishing updates, articles, and every now and then I'll give you some behind the scenes footage on my Instagram account. Well, with all of that said, thank you so much for viewing this video, and I really hope that you enjoyed it. So until next time, guys, thank you very much.